Hello everyone, I'm Ioannis Vitoris, and I welcome you to my presentation about the applications of harmonic sequences in classical music improvisation pedagogy, which falls under the category of pedagogy at the conference about improvisation in historical styles. Here's a basic outline of the current presentation, which should begin with an introduction. So, first things first. Isn't classical music improvisation a dead thing? Why did it emerge again? Well, I have listed some factors which contributed to its resurrection. To be more specific, the partimento and solfeggio traditions, which were presented through the influential work of many researchers and distributed via the internet to a large audience of music professionals, enthusiasts, lovers, students, teachers, and others, seems to cover the core need for human expression. So, the message here is that many people want to learn improvisation, and here lies the usefulness of it, the usefulness of harmonic sequences. Why are the harmonic sequences useful for teaching improvisation today? Well, because students today have neither the quantity nor the quality of time which students, for example, at the conservatory in Naples had. They were being instructed and practicing long hours for many years in order to acquire the necessary skills of an all-around musician. They were also exposed to such music at the opera or at the church, whereas today the main exposure time to Baroque or classical, romantic, or other music is much more limited, and consequently, concepts such as polyphony, prelude, and fugue are more difficult to be grasped or even experienced. Many of the students back then were solely dedicated to the goal of reaching a high level of music craftsmanship. It would be their way of making a living. So, it is urgent to recalibrate the improvisation teaching strategy. Here are some crucial points about this strategy proposed here. Of course, we cannot ignore the foundation which is set by the partimento and the solfeggio traditions. Upon this foundation, and with the aid of the teacher's inventiveness, a set of interconnected courses about historical style improvisation can be created, the common thread of which will be the usage of harmonic sequences. Now, I assume that most of you are already familiar with this definition or even more elaborate definitions, or with these very characteristic sequences. These types will be our starting point for presenting some applications of the sequences at the improvisation pedagogy, with the sevenths here, the Romanesca and the Monte Romanesca. And now, I should mention that the 10 applications are presented here with an order of progressively increasing technical difficulty and complexity. Each application is inspired by the corresponding examples in the repertoire. So, keyboard technique is a prerequisite of keyboard improvisation. This step, although dull sometimes, should and cannot be omitted. So the task is to make it interesting, accessible, and yet challenging. Harmonic sequences are able to fulfill this task. We see here Bach's preludes, and of course dozens of other techniques could be presented, but I chose the chord progressions and the chord arpeggiations because are among the most common and necessary, for example, in preluding. Okay. Further examples here, starting with 2 voice textures and moving to 3 voice textures in odd time signatures and triple meter time signatures. So we're trying to experiment and have a variety in time signatures as well. Okay. Moving to the next application, an improviser ought to have a developed inner ear, or using the appropriate jargon, should have developed audiation and relative pitch skills. There's not a more suitable way than the singing and the solfeggio exercises for this task. Of course, I present here some much simpler exercises. This can be the starting point for the coordination and concentration, and of course, the integration of these harmonic sequences at one's disposal. What else will an improviser need to do? Most possibly, an improviser will need to present the theme in different tonalities. How can he be acquainted with the different keys? Well, harmonic sequences can be an answer. Here I present an example for insanguine. Um, and let's move to a further example. Uh, we understand here that the progression has a function of thematic, a thematic function. It's a thematic chord progression. Um, it's still very generic, but it should be so at this level for educational purposes. It serves the territory on which we will put the theme. What happens after the thematic chord progression is presented? There's a need for interludes, bridges, episodes, etc. I made some notes here. The important things to be gained from these examples are that the motivic economy and consistency which the written compositions, especially those of Bach, feature, are an ideal, but not our number one consideration. Our number one consideration is the flow. And moving forward, here is illustrated much more vividly. The font and the Monte Romanesca here do not serve that much in terms of motives, but as long as the flow is ensured, we should be content. About the fifth application. Up until now, we've been discussing about a very schematic usage of sequences. Excuse me. Now, the increase of difficulty is more evident. We're trying to decorate the schematic progressions, and I'm using, let me clarify, I'm using the term decoratio with the broader sense of adding figurations and giving character to a certain schematically outlined piece. Of course, the goal of the improviser is to make music, not merely to regurgitate some cliches. Here, using an ascending 5-6 sequence or a cycle of fifths sequence, different meters as we told before. And now, supposing that the improviser is able to play extempore, thematic, and connected material with enough confidence, how will his or her pieces sound more personal? He or she should start to create more personal themes. Of course, he should not reinvent the wheel, but the harmonic sequences help greatly the student at his or her first steps. Harmonic sequences are by now assimilated and sound very convincing. Here we see how Vivaldi exploited the circle of fifths sequence. Okay, the students, however, should be encouraged to experiment with lesser known or used types of sequences, as here an ascending fourths sequence. Of course, the descending fourths sequence is the well-known circle of fifths sequence. And what does come after the invetio of a theme? The development of it, which usually requires some per-thinking on behalf of the improviser. Here we observe the theme, the tail of which entails, okay, a certain circle of fifths type of sequences. Okay, now thinking in terms of motives, and most of all recognizing their developmental potential is the goal here. Some further examples to illustrate this. This thought process of recognizing the developmental potential of one's motives can take place while improvising, if not beforehand, but this on-the-spot thinking process requires much more experience. Here, the second box presents a Monte Romanesca, exploiting the motive C and motive B, altering, of course, when necessary, the intervals. Now, some more specific aspects of the theme development are the 8th and the 9th application. Here the goal isn't to produce a flawless canon, but to evoke the effect of echo and close, or if you like, stretto-like imitation, which canons usually arise. Let's examine, though, a much simpler example than Bach's. Basically, we're dealing with downward stepwise scales, harmonized either with a circle of fifths or an ascending 5-6 sequence. Here, the ideal of simplicity and effectiveness is achieved, whereas more intricate textures would require much more effort in advance. That is, they're not so beginner or intermediate level improviser friendly. And another great tool for development is the invertible counterpoint, here seen in the G major fugue from Bach's first one-tempered clavier. What does invertible counterpoint evoke? What's the effect of it? Well, we could say that through repetition, and as the repetition of the theme also does, a sense of wholeness, familiarity, and unity is evoked, while this repetition brings some freshness and variety. Now, one might wonder, why did you, Ioannis, place the canon before the invertible counterpoint? Isn't invertible counterpoint easier than the canon? Well, my view is that writing a full canon on paper is truly much more difficult than the concept of invertible counterpoint. But when improvising, the mental effort required for the short-term memory to retain a sequential episode which employs invertible counterpoint is far more greater than the task of more immediate canon-like imitations in a harmonic sequence context. To make this more enlightening, here is a two-voice texture where the soprano and alto, the bass and the soprano interchange their material, and we can move to a three-voice texture, simple melodic lines, which still, supposedly the student has acquired the skill to use the cycle of fifths, can evoke the feelings of wholeness, unity, and freshness as well. Last but not least, analyzing pieces and forming one's own improvisations is very crucial. Of course, there's not one magic recipe or a one size fits all thought process which is suitable for improvisers to organize their improvised pieces. But there's a crucial point which we should highlight. The improviser, as the composer does, should not just put some lengthy and over analytical labels at the level of, and should not stop at the level of what is happening at the piece, but should also move forward to the level of why is it happening, what's the effect of it, and how does it contribute to the whole. When would I like to evoke such an effect in my own improvisations? For this reason, I have used some keywords in this analysis. For example, introduction. So, I introduce not only the theme, but the time signature, the theme, the tonality, And introductions normally take some time. Interlude, a pause, so more free material, modulation, which has a sense of moving forward to new territories, cadences, punctuations, so we're slowing down the momentum, and climaxes, intense moments, more movement, extreme ranges. Uh, I tried to put all these forces into action into one example. Let's listen. And to sum up, the harmonic sequences are remarkable tools to introduce major improvisation and music in general skills and concepts to the students, alongside with the traditional ways of teaching improvisation, especially when the latter are not conveniently applicable. I listed some useful resources which I consulted and I recommend for further studying. So that's all for now. I hope you found something inspiring in all this. Here I have prepared a riddle canon for you. The task is simple. At which intervallic and temporal distance will a comes produce a canon which features um, a Romanesca, an ascending 5/6 sequence, and a cycle of fifths sequence? The solution will be given either at the conference or with a new video, or maybe both. Thank you very much.